Hey everybody, another big week in AI, and I wanted to cover the top stories from last week. This is the AI Big Five. Stories ranging from a new free tool for everyone from Google. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei said something very exciting or worrying about where all the computer code is going to come from in the next 3 to 6 months. A fully autonomous agentic system took the internet by storm called Manus, and we dive into that one quite deeply, using it, in fact, to tell one of the stories that we have this week. And finally, the big story. You got to stick around for this one. The White House put out a request for information around the AI policies that they're about to enact, and all the companies responded. But first, let's dive into some of the stories that didn't quite make the cut for the Big Five. Okay, our first quick story comes from Baidu. They announced 2 new models, Ernie 4.5 and Ernie X1. The X1 being the reasoning model similar to DeepSeek R1. And speaking of DeepSeek R1, the reason this is news, it says it performs the same essentially as the DeepSeek R1 model, but only at half price to produce. And if you remember, DeepSeek was the one that caused a whole bunch of noise in the stock market just a month or so ago. The next quick story, Google DeepMind released a model called Gemini Robotics that kind of mixes their Gemini 2 models with robotics. Some very interesting sharing in here. They're kind of saying that plugging the LLM into the robotic system is an unlock for some of the natural language commands. That seems obvious, but also generalization across tasks. This one's actually quite interesting. If you're interested at all in robotics, and certainly AI and robotics, this one I would say pass by. Come take a look at some of the videos that they've shared. There's some very interesting things that they're showing off here. The machines can now fold origami and are more adaptive to their environment. They don't have to have seen things. It seems far more generalistic, and their dexterity seems to be much higher. Can't go into this one, didn't make it to the big list, but this one's really worth it if you're interested in this kind of thing. All right, another short one, Sakana AI Labs. They generated a first peer-reviewed scientific publication. So essentially, this model that they have, the AI Scientist version 2, has created an entirely novel concept, gone through the entire paper writing process, written the hypothesis, the experimentation, doing all of the work, creating the publication, and then getting that publication peer-reviewed. Kind of fantastic. This one is definitely worth a look if you're into the science side of what AI is doing. This one has a lot of potential, and of course, my belief, it's only the very beginning of what we're about to see in this space. All right, and as the last quick one, Mark Gurman reports that Apple is looking at putting cameras into their Airpods. These are the very popular wireless earbuds that they have. It looks like they're looking at putting cameras inside, micro cameras apparently inside of the earbud stalks themselves. There's some belief that this could possibly debut in the AirPod Pro 4. You can imagine that this is kind of AI smart glasses without the glasses. But it also might work very well together with the smart glasses that are reportedly coming from Apple as well. Gotta move on. Let's get to the big stories. Okay, the first one, this is an easy one. Maybe you've heard of Google Gemini. Gemini is the set of models from Google. They recently announced moving their deep research product. So they have a product very similar to other deep research products that will go out and do a series of steps to research a bunch of websites and other information and pull back a meaningful report. I did a video on all of the different research products that were out there, and there's produced reasonable results, but that was on the 1.5 model. They've very recently, this week, announced that they've gone up to the 2.0 model. I have tested the deep research with 2.0, and I found it very, very good. What's really exciting here is they're releasing this to everyone, free. So if you have any interest in trying a deep research product but haven't really been able to try one, I would say definitely go out to Google Gemini and take a look. It actually works quite well. Let's take a look at one. Okay, as mentioned, our big story that'll be coming up in a minute is about the White House asking for information from the different model providers and others in the industry. I've put the question to deep research here and other tools. You'll see Manus in a second that did a great job. In fact, we'll be using it to kind of source a lot of the information for this. But I will say Gemini Deep Research did a really great job as well, and it's very worth looking through what you can get from it. First, You can see that I put in a question here. It comes back with a list of what it's going to do and asks you to either edit the plan that it came up with or move forward. And then it takes a while. So it takes a few minutes. It can take up to 20 minutes kind of thing sometimes. And then it starts working through its research steps. So this is the document that you see that it returned. One of the really interesting things about deep research from Gemini is that you have the ability to export it to a doc so that you can put it into your drive immediately as an actual doc, stored forever. You don't have to go hunt around and find it. And as you see when we scroll down through all of this, it's a really well-formed report. It kind of follows the structured prompt that I gave it, and it goes through the different model providers. I asked for a breakdown of each one of the model providers' proposals, what they were interested in, and I think that Google did almost the best job in this space, actually. Deep research from Google does a very good job of creating tables. I guess we shouldn't be surprised by that. I asked for all of this in a matrix to better understand each one of the themes that people were talking about in their papers and what they were putting forward, as well as what their feelings were so that I could do direct comparisons between them. But at the bottom, you can see that you can also export it to sheets. So not only can you export the whole thing to documents, you can export all the tables that you find to sheets independently, which then can be data that you use for other systems that can pull that in. The actual exciting news here, once again, first off, it went to 2.0. Turns out really good reports. That's worth it. Number two, really worth hearing. This is free. Go take a look. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, our second story, Google's hitting it out of the park. They were big news last time around. They're big news this time as well. Second one happens to be from Google as well. It's Gemma 3. So they've released Gemma 3. Gemma, essentially, the idea behind Gemma is a set of models that can run on much lower powered systems with less GPU, less compute potentially, less memory, those kinds of things. They're highly quantized, or there is a major model that can be highly quantized, and it's let's call it an open model. They like to call it an open model. And it's basically, they outline who can use it, how you can use it. You get a whole bunch of free usage if you're an educational environment and other things. And then you have the rights to use it in development environments, a bunch of things that you can try to test things out without having to pay for it. It's really not quite open source, but that's okay. Everybody's trying to figure out where this really fits, where all of these different open source mechanisms fit. But what's interesting about this one is we'll see its performance down here is Gemma 3 has some wonderful performance characteristics compared to other very performant models that we know today. So this one is listed as outperforming Llama 3 405B. So this is kind of the 400 billion parameter model from Llama, the biggest 3 version of Llama that we have. DeepSeek V3, so that one's enormous that it outperforms V3. O3 Mini. And this is all really coming from, you can see Ella Marina's leaderboard, and that's a place that they put, a couple models' answers in front of you for a question, but they don't tell you which model is which. You select which one you like. People do this over and over. It gets bounced up onto a leaderboard. Very interesting to see that this is kind of human preferred evaluation, actually. But these are designed to run on a single GPU or TPU host. They're also multimodal by definition. They're announcing that they can analyze images, text, and short videos. And that's really amazing to think that you might have something that can run on a single GPU system that can also analyze a video, those kinds of things. You can really start to think of local kind of performance systems that are doing heavy power work that we previously would have absolutely been using a cloud model for. 128 token context input window, function calling and structured output. From an engineering standpoint, these are the important ones to hear. It's really commensurate with a lot of the models that are out there. If we look at the ELO scores of this, you can see that we're looking at the 27 billion model, and this is the 27 billion parameter model is the biggest Gemma model, the Gemma 3 model. This is the big model. It gets quantized all the way down to a 1 billion parameter version that's highly quantized. It can still execute on a single H100. So this is a very interesting chart to me that you can see what it takes to execute this model. You might imagine, I'm sure they're trying to represent this as what kind of performance is required or what kind of compute is required to execute this model to get this kind of performance. But this is DeepSeek R1, right? We're really putting it next to some major models right now. And this is the DeepSeek R1 is a very big model. This one is far smaller and very performant. Highly worth taking a look at. The exciting part about this to me is from an engineering standpoint specifically, this is purported to be able to run in something like a cell phone or other handheld devices, certainly on your own laptop, those kinds of things. And the fact that they quantize all the way down to a 1 billion version really gives a lot of space to be able to perform some kind of operations that are intelligence level operations on a low power device or a smaller device, one that has less capacity for this kind of operation. But this one performs so well that it's definitely worth mentioning. And I think it's only because we're getting up on the curve. This is about time that anybody that's starting to put out these kinds of models, their performance is going to see this very high characteristic. Okay, enough Google. Let's move on to somebody else. Okay, everybody's been talking about Manus. So Manus represents a system you can put a prompt into, and that prompt will go off, we'll see this in just a second, go off and research on the web, get as much information as it can. It creates a whole plan, has a checklist on that plan that it works its way through. It has the ability to use a full Linux system. So it's a lot more powerful than something like Operator, which was only web-based. So this one's very exciting. It's got some real opportunities that people have been exploring on the internet. I will take you through a very quick trip here of how I used it and also a very simple example. I'm not going to do much here because I've spent other time on it. Let's take a very quick peek into what Manus does. Okay, if I select a playback from one of the ones that Manus has shared with us, you can see that somebody put in a request that says I need a 7-day itinerary for Japan from Seattle with me and my fiance. Here's the places I want to see. I want to see different attractions and I might propose and a fun plan for us places to stay. And what you're seeing on the right over here is Manus doing the work. So this is the actual work as it's occurring. It built applications, it searched the web, it did analysis. So it came back with a very interesting report of all of the different places that they could go. It also created a little book that they can use to kind of keep on them at any time. It's a little HTML file that shows them where they should go, the things that are interested, the places that they mentioned in the plan for them, and allows them to kind of see the different key attractions in places, have different phrases, essential expressions, those kinds of things. So very neat little use of an agentic system. Go build me all of this, go research the right places. It even says how much it is to buy deer food because there's a place that you can kind of interact with deer there. I'm going to show you what I did with it because it's the thing that we're going to use at the end. So this is basically the same prompt you just saw in Deep Research. I asked the same question. It kicks off and says, sure, I'm going to help you with all of this. And as it starts moving through the different requests that it needs to create, so it creates this little to-do system and it starts checking things off. And it sends off an agent that goes and fulfills one of these to-do items, which comes back and checks this off, which indicates to basically the manager process, the executive process, oh, I need to kick off the next one. Who do I need to do that work? And so that's kind of what's happening here. Interestingly, you can see it browsing certain areas. So it'll go search for a bunch of things, and then it'll browse one of these given pages. It browsed the Anthropic page, and then you'll see that it scrolls down. It takes a picture of that page, and it scrolls down. It takes a picture of that part of the page. And that's how it kind of works its way through the system. And it's doing all of that work all the way to the bottom where it ends up with the final to-do and delivers the report to us that we'll be reading in a second, as well as some charts. So very cool. This took, I don't even know, it took 15 minutes or something to do, 20 minutes, but I wasn't there. It sent me a notification when it was complete. Very cool. If you haven't heard of Manus, it's worth going and signing up for. It takes a while to get access to. Once you get access to it, it's fun just to throw something at it. Okay, I've got something actually kind of big for you to see. All right, this one's kind of made the rounds. It's worth hearing. I find Dario to be a very, very smart guy. I think he's also very thoughtful. He's put a couple pieces out in the world that have helped quite a few of us kind of frame the concept of what's going on in AI. He's the CEO of Anthropic, basically the Claude models, and they have a different kind of bent on the way that they're attacking the AI problem, AGI problem, those kinds of things. He has been asked here at the Council of Foreign Relations, they're interviewing him, asking him what he thinks of the future and how the future is going to be changed by AI. And this one particular quote that we're going to go through is a very meaningful quote, especially from a engineering standpoint, a computer system standpoint. So it's worth just taking a listen and then we'll talk about it.
Powerful tool. If I look at coding, programming, which is one area where AI is making the most progress. What we are finding is we are not far from a world, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months, where AI is writing 90% of the code. And then in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all of the code. But the programmer still needs to specify, what are the conditions of what you're doing? What is the overall app you're trying to make? What's the overall design decision? How do we collaborate with other code that's been written? How do we have some common sense on whether this is a secure design or an insecure design? So as long as there are these small pieces that a human programmer needs to do that the AI isn't good at, I think human productivity will actually be enhanced. But on the other hand, I think that eventually all those little islands will get picked off by AI systems. And then we will eventually reach the point where the AIs can do everything that humans can. And I think that will happen in every industry. I think it's actually better that it happens to all of us than that it happens, that it kind of picks people randomly. I actually think the most societally divisive outcome is if randomly 50% of the jobs are suddenly done by AI, because what that means, the societal message is we're randomly picking half of people and saying, you are useless, you are devalued, you are unnecessary.
Okay, so like I said, this quote has been kind of making the rounds. It's worth contextualizing it a little bit. I wanted to play it all out here because a lot of people are clipping out in 3 to 6 months, 90% of all computer code will be written by AI. That's a very salacious statement. It's an exciting statement. It's one that I agree is a possibility. I think technically it is a possibility. There's an adoption curve, I think, that's going to be important here. In other words, they're difficult to implement day one, but a year from now, they might not be difficult at all. They just might be the standard tooling or a new set of tooling that we bring in and just turn on. So it's entirely possible that the adoption curve that we've seen in the past, which has been very difficult and bespoke applications having to be written to adopt it, that might be gone because literally of AI, making it easier to adopt AI. However, what I find very important about what he's saying, there's 2 things here that are very important. One is the general message of someone who is deep inside of this stuff. The message here that's worth hearing is this is coming. His dates may be off. Imagine if he's 100% off. Then we're talking 2 years before 100% of the code is written by AI. That's not very far out. This day is coming. Nobody is saying, oh no, AI will never write code. Those days are gone. AI will absolutely be writing code. It was 5 months ago that Google came out and Sundar Pichai said that 20%, 25% of their new code is already being written by AI. And that's nowhere near the kind of tools that we have today to do this. The tools today lap the tools that he had back then when he was mentioning that. So this is absolutely coming. Get ready for it. If you're in the engineering space, if you're a professional in that space, don't be fearful of it. Figure out how to use it. It will be a tool. That really leads into the second thing that I think Dario is mentioning here, which is really fundamental and really important about all of this. This is not an end all. This is not because AI can write computer code, nobody has a job. That is not this story. That's how it's being played. A lot of people are kind of drumming that part of it up. I think it can absolutely mean that some people don't have their jobs in a couple months, in 6 months in his time frame. That's entirely possible. And it's very possible to imagine companies first shrinking and seeing efficiencies as something that they can show to their shareholders or stockholders and say, look, we can reduce the number of people we have to seem more attractive. We're doing the same amount of work. But I think the smart companies will look at it and say, we'll be able to do twice as much stuff rather than do it with half as many people. Because I think productivity is always on the gain. It's very infrequent that a company actually wants to stand still doing what they're doing today simply for less money. There may be some out there. The ones that I work with very generally are interested in more. How can we do more? How can we be more broad? How can we be in different industries or different scenarios that we're not in today And this really helps that story. So I think it's really a value statement of productivity to come rather than a fear statement of jobs that will be lost. I just wanted to say that I think this is an important statement. I cannot stress enough that I fully believe what he's saying is very likely that in 6 months, almost all of the computer code could be written by AI. In my eyes, on some level, it kind of should be. A lot of it should be. Certainly not all of it. There's some very nested code that would be a little bit more challenging to get the context around, but we will solve that puzzle as well. And then we will be in a place that we can cooperate with those AI systems building that code, like he mentions, and work with them to build far better systems. That's really the future I see. It's not, we're going to walk away and have no job. Maybe that occurs in the next 5 years. Don't know. That one's very difficult to see. Even if that does occur, there will still be jobs for people to do, and there will still be part of the process that AI is not perfect at, and that my intelligence system will be better than some other intelligence system. Easier to use, more adaptable, quicker to change, whatever it might be. In any case, those are my beliefs. I found this one really interesting. This one to me is a major story of the week. Just hearing a leader saying something like this that's so discreet, it's worth listening to. All right, let's get on to the biggest story. Okay, so here we are, we've gotten to it. This is the big one, at least to me. In my eyes, this is the one that has the most far-reaching value that we heard about in this last week. Manus is impressive. The Gemma model is actually kind of very interesting. Having free deep research tools, great. But this one could change quite a few things. I believe it was in February, the White House basically got rid of the AI policies that were in place previously and put their own policies in place. What they did do, and I think this is a reasonable thing to have done, is they put out what they call an RFI, which is a request for information. And they send it out to industry leaders saying, if you have an interest that you think is important for us to understand as we manage AI going forward, why don't you let us know? It's how much regulation they want, how much they are interested in national security, kind of energy consumption, how we do with infrastructure, as well as dealing with copyright material. And that's the one that I think is very interesting, and I think a lot of people will be interested in. So let's take a look at some of their responses here. By the way, as I mentioned, this one I am using Manus, the thing that we looked at earlier. So this is that Agentic system. I threw the same prompt in here. We saw it build this. And so this is the outcome of this, and I thought it would be interesting for you to see the deeper result of what Manus can deliver. The key findings were that all three major AI companies advocate for minimal regulation. I guess that's not terribly surprising. Basically, they're getting in line with the Trump White House, which is anti-regulation across a lot of the AI space. It says Google was the most aggressive in pushing for deregulation. That's mentioned multiple times in the Google response as well. National security focus is another interesting one. All three companies frame their recommendations relative to the US-China competition. So that's worth understanding that a lot of what everybody is talking about here is, do we want to compete with China? Do we want to keep China from being able to compete with us? What will they do if we don't do certain things? A lot of that occurred in these responses, and it's difficult to read through whether or not that's a straw man, whether or not that's just something that they're saying that they can make people concerned about, and please listen to my concerns because, you know, big bad China, or whether it's real. Some of that is how you feel about the geopolitical tensions. Another aspect of this is how you feel about the adoption of AI or the gain of AI in any given nation first. The idea that some people hold is the first nation that gets the really advanced AGI, whatever you might call it, may have an unattainable lead for others who get there later. So there is a consideration of, if somebody is going to get there first and that group has the opportunity to frame how people should behave with this, how they should interact with it, what it means to have it. But basically the concept is we want to beat China there for a couple reasons. We don't want China to get the best AI military solutions and be able to dominate immediately. That could be devastating. So it does make sense from just a national defense standpoint. And then the second would be, if China has AI before we have AI and they stay the leader, their mechanisms, the way that they treat their systems and their population, if that becomes part of the way that AI is managed, is that good or bad? So that's kind of the general framing, I think, that's going through this. Another one, this is really to me, the biggest one that people should hear about, because it's probably the most meaningful for us to understand, and it's just talked about a lot. I don't know that this solves anything, but it's the copyright idea. So they say copyright tensions. Google and OpenAI strongly advocate for fair use exceptions. And this just basically means we want to be able to use copyrighted material when we train our models. We want an exception to all the fair use laws that are already out there while we're training so that we can train on as broad an information set as possible. And it looked like during this that Anthropic did not push for this or did not mention this explicitly in their responses, and that's why they're not mentioned here. Anthropic was most interested in infrastructure in a lot of ways, trying to get the energy output of the US addressed as quickly as possible. But all of them were really pushing for accelerationist sounding material. They were basically saying we need to move forward as quickly as possible. There are some unique call outs that I'll make here about Anthropic. One of the things that they were kind of focused on that no one else seems to have touched on was asking for this ability of systems to be able to be evaluated for national security implications. So essentially, can we set up a rubric, some kind of testing mechanism to verify new models and where they are on kind of a danger level relative to national security? And when they talk about national security implications here, how easy it is to create fissile material, create nuclear bombs, create massive destructions, all kinds of things that today are more difficult unless you're a state actor. Do these models increase that threat level to the general public? That's what they're interested in, not just is hacking easier and those kinds of things. What we're really worried about is the major existential kind of threats. So they're pushing for evaluating those kind of models on that. They want some tighter restrictions on the exports of the semiconductors. They also want the 50 gigawatt additional power by 2027. So they believe, power generation is very important. If we scroll down and look at the other organizations, there were 2,200 other publishers that strongly emphasized protecting intellectual property, of course. And the Authors Alliance came out and said they want fair compensation or attribution for written works that are trained on, those kinds of things. Obviously, this is a space that they care a lot about. It's worth mentioning that they also fed back into this system saying, don't just run us over because we're worried about the big China threat. And it's, I think, a worthwhile statement to hear. Then if we kind of walk down to each one of these independently, we can see Google and OpenAI are strongly aligned in advocating for fair use exceptions for AI training. They say it's critical for maintaining US leadership in AI. Okay, so this one I'll stop on for a second and say what they're saying is if we're not allowed to train on everything, but China, which they're pretty certain, they assert in their responses, in fact, they're pretty certain will train on everything. They're not going to stop at the IP gates like the US companies will. Then that by definition is likely to give an edge to this AI race to China. And so there's a nuance in this that I think is worth understanding. Wherever you might fall on the copyright conversation, it is important to understand what these models train on is the things that they can make decisions from. So more training material really largely matters to the intelligence level, those kinds of things. But it is a very interesting statement to say, look, if our opponent in all of this is not paying attention to these rules, but you're holding us to the rules, then by definition, we are likely to lose. And if losing this is truly potentially existential, then it's too important to lose. And thus something like this comes into play. So it is worth just framing it from that standpoint. Have a discussion about it. Feel free to drop something in the comments on which side of this you fall on, because I think both of them have interesting arguments. I'm just reporting what's here. I'm trying to. All right, for infrastructure, Anthropic wants the power. OpenAI has already put forward that $500 billion Stargate project that they're interested in, which is a whole bunch of different data centers that are interlinked kind of across the country, which also includes power. Google generally was talking about power and addressing the surging energy needs that are coming. AI adoption in the government, that was an interesting one. That each one of them was saying it's very important that we get AI deeply invested into the government as quickly as we can, Anthropic being the least aggressive in this space. But Google and OpenAI were both very, very adamant about we need to very aggressively get AI deeply into our government operations as soon as possible. So in general, OpenAI was interested in curtailing fair use or giving exceptions for fair use. and really leading the fight against China's AI ambition. So really, they were trying to say China is a bad actor in this space, or a very high likelihood bad actor in this space. We do not want them to win. They were very forceful in that. Google was actually against state regulations being put into place. They call it kind of EU-style state regulations that are coming into play, and worried about there being little pockets of different values or different rules for different states. And they want a federal oversight or a federal rule set to control that. And Anthropic, again, had a couple differences that we talked about. They're aligned with national security, very interested in infrastructure, but they also had one last one, which was a lab security provision. They want the government and some of our security services to take an active role in protecting some of the IP that's inside of these AI companies. He went on to say something like there's 100 lines of code in multiple companies that's worth maybe billions, trillions of dollars. We need to prevent those from being stolen. They are no doubt already actively being stolen or attempting to be stolen. And we should be very active and very aggressive in trying to prevent that if what we're trying to do is win this AI race. Okay, as always, we had a lot going on in AI this week. So some things didn't make the news at all. There were a couple other things that just didn't even make the short list, the short list, if you will. But this was the AI Big Five for the week. I hope seeing this helps kind of understand all of the different moving parts that happened this week with a little bit of context to it so that we can kind of understand what happens next week. At least that's how I feel about it. Thanks for coming along on the ride on this one, and I'll see you in the next one.